Bonjour à tous. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session on the confluence of the environmental crisis, climate change, and conflict. This session has been co-designed by ChangeNOW and the Kofi Annan Foundation. My name is Roure. I'm the Deputy Director in charge of programs at the Kofi Annan Foundation, and I will be moderating this session. So why this topic? Here at ChangeNOW and more widely in the general public, there is increased awareness of the existential threat posed by the climate crisis to our well-being and to our planet. But perhaps there is less consciousness about another major threat, which is the fragility of global peace. In the last 12 years, battle deaths reached their highest levels since the end of the Cold War. Peace agreements reached between 2005 and 2020 are half less successful and lasting than those reached between 1990 and 2005. And we see every day in the news how our multilateral system is divided and completely unable to take any serious action to stop war. Through our peacebuilding work at the Kofi Annan Foundation, we observe that many of the countries affected by conflict are also those most vulnerable to climate change and environmental degradation. So those challenges reinforce each other, and this is why they must be taken together, and they require multiple solutions. So this is what we want to unpack with this session. It will be divided into 3 segments. First, our keynote speaker will help us understand how climate, environment, and conflict intersect. Then in the second segment, our 3 panelists will share with us the solutions they have developed to tackle these multiple challenges. And lastly, we will have a fireside chat with a social entrepreneur who will explain to us what brought him to support victims of violence and of climate crisis in his country, Pakistan. But first things first. Before I invite our amazing speakers to join me on stage, I have a little quiz for you. So I'd like you to, there may be a QR code that will appear. Maybe not. Ah, here it is. So if you can scan the QR code, or you can also go to the menti.com website and then enter the code that's on the left-hand side. I've got 3 questions for you. You ready? No? So, question 1. Oh. Out of the 25 countries most vulnerable to climate change, how many have an active conflict? Would you say there are 8, 23, or 14? Let me see. Yeah, you're very close. So the right answer is 14. So within this list of countries most vulnerable to climate change, we find Afghanistan, Somalia, the DRC, Yemen, and Mali among the lowest ranked. And all of them are dealing with conflict. So this shows that countries enduring conflict are less able to cope with climate change. Let's move to the second question. What percentage of wars in the past 60 years can be linked to natural resources? (22%, 40%, or 67%? So let's see the results. 67. So it's actually 40%. 40% of conflicts have a link with natural resources. And what's more, this link to natural resources actually makes peace less lasting because it doubles the risk of a conflict relapse within the first 5 years. Then the last question, it's about money. If we compare the money spent for peace building and peacekeeping with military spending, do you think that it equals to 0.5% of military spending, 13%, or 26% of military spending? You're right, and it's sad. So in 2021, expenditure on peace building and peacekeeping was $41.8 billion, while military expenditure rose to $7.7 trillion. And this was even before the Ukraine war, which further boosted military expenditure. So this shows that the potential benefits of investing in peace building are enormous. So thanks for your participation in the quiz. Now we're ready to welcome our keynote speaker. Our first speaker is Hannah Moosa from the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN. Hannah is an expert in water-related transboundary conflicts and in the use of natural resource management as a tool for peace building. Hannah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Maud, for the kind introduction. And thank you to ChangeNOW and the Kofi Annan Foundation for convening us on such a critical topic. Good afternoon, everyone. If you ask an ecologist, a political security analyst, an international development practitioner to name the countries and regions of gravest concern to them, while their points of departure may be different, their final lists might look remarkably similar. Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Haiti, Iraq, Central Asia, the Sahel, Somalia, Yemen, and the list goes on. Over the past 50 years, policymakers, researchers, and practitioners have recognized that environmental degradation and contested natural resources are part of the reason why people fight and kill each other. As Maud just mentioned, an estimated 40% of civil wars between 1950 and 2010 were associated with natural resources. And armed conflicts of all kinds have had significant impacts on the natural world. At the same time, climate change is beginning to redraw the maps of the world with far-reaching consequences for lives, livelihoods, and political stability. The importance of a healthy environment and a stable climate to peace and security has risen in prominence because it makes intuitive sense. But this has also been borne out by decades of academic research, practice, and evidence. So to better understand these interconnections between the environment, natural resources, climate, biodiversity, peace and conflict, let's take a look at the environment, natural resource risks, and opportunities along the conflict cycle. So we're meant to be moving to a slide showing you conflict and the conflict cycle, but I'll just continue in the meantime. There we go. So here you see essentially a taxonomy of warfare which has been expanded to depict environmental opportunities and risks across the conflict life cycle. Now, I know it seems quite complex, but we'll slowly work our way through the key highlights of this graph. So first, let's start by looking at the cause of tensions and grievances. Climate and environmental change, as well as corruption, the poor management and inequitable allocation of resources increases the risks of conflict, particularly in places which are already fractured by socioeconomic inequality, ethnic divisions, or ideological divides. In Sierra Leone, for example, grievances over the distribution of land, corruption in the diamond sector, and the inadequate sharing of benefits were driving causes of the civil war, which killed more than 70,000 people and displaced more than 2 million. Often framed as threat multipliers, the direct impacts of climate change, such as extreme heat and reduced rainfall, can also have severe impacts on the availability and the quality of natural resources. Large-scale movements of people forced to leave their homes as a result of climate change can contribute to social tensions in places that they move to, but also expose these people to huge personal risks. So now let's move on to looking at a set of risks to the natural resources and the environment during conflict itself. First of all, natural resources can provide a revenue stream for rebels and other armed groups. Since 1990, at least 35 major armed conflicts have been directly financed by the trade in high-value natural resources. For example, diamonds in Sierra Leone, Côte d'Ivoire, and Angola. But there are also a wide range of other natural resources which can finance conflict. Charcoal, fisheries, and bananas in Somalia, and opium poppy in Afghanistan, for example. Sadly, there are no shortage of cases where the environment has also been used as a weapon of war and where the environment has been damaged in the conflict. During the first Gulf War between 1990 and 1991, Iraq set fire to over 600 Kuwaiti oil fields. As a result, a staggering 11 million barrels of crude oil poured into the Persian Gulf, creating a slick 9 miles long. In Darfur and the former Yugoslav republics, combatants poisoned wells to drive people from their communities. Attacks on Yemen's water infrastructure exacerbated a cholera outbreak, which has caused an estimated 4,000 deaths since April 2017. But not only that, wars also damage infrastructure, military equipment, cause pollution, and leave behind unexploded ordnance, which renders land unusable for agriculture and building. In Ukraine, cities and towns have been devastated by the use of explosive weapons, leaving millions of tons of contaminated debris. Natural resources, though, also continue to present a risk to armed conflict, even once there are peace agreements in place. Civil wars with a strong resource or environmental dimension also tend to be harder to resolve and more likely to slip back into violence. While there's a long history of scholarly and policy considerations of the interlinkages between war and the environment, specific relationships between armed conflict and nature conservation has received much less attention. A recent IUCN flagship report on conflict and conservation fills this gap. focusing on living nature, which is biodiversity. As with the environment more broadly, the report finds that the linkages between conflict and nature and natural resources are not unidirectional, but go both ways, with nature and natural resources playing a critical role in conflict, but conflict in turn also affecting them. The impacts of armed conflict on nature are overwhelmingly negative, although they vary widely across contexts. These impacts can include direct killing of individual organisms for trade or for food, the degradation of ecosystems as both a tactic and a consequence of war, and the persecution of environmental defenders. Analyzing armed conflict over the past 30 years, this report reveals that biodiversity in general and threatened species in particular are more likely than expected to exist in areas that have experienced armed conflict. However, all is not doom and gloom. Now that we've identified some of the key risks, how can natural resources and environment support the peace agenda? What are some of the opportunities along the conflict cycle? Enter the field of environmental peacebuilding, which essentially provides a framework for understanding the interlinkages between natural resources and the environment on one hand, and peace and conflict on the other. With the knowledge that a mismanagement of resources can contribute to conflict, there have been growing efforts to strengthen both environmental and natural resource governance and management in order to prevent the escalation of conflict. Establishing and managing protected areas and the greening of military and humanitarian operations helps better manage these resources. Environmental issues can also provide an important platform for dialogue and communication. Transboundary natural resources such as water or wildlife can serve as an important entry point for cooperation between warring parties and provide a rationale for collaboration at a technical level, even when there's already an unfavorable political situation. Innovative technologies such as satellite mapping, remote sensing, and AI are increasingly being used to help improve early warning, conflict prevention, and monitoring and evaluation of interventions. New legal processes are creating further opportunities. In October 2021, the UN Human Rights Council adopted a landmark resolution recognizing the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. With a growing number and diversity of actors working on environmental peacebuilding at all scales, there's an increasing interest in interdisciplinary approaches and an opportunity to focus on building community-based natural resource management, driven in many instances by youth, women, and indigenous people and local communities, often the individuals with the most knowledge, but also those most vulnerable to the impacts of conflict and climate change. Developing and implementing nature-based solutions offers yet another opportunity to tackle multiple drivers of conflict at the same time, including climate change and environmental impacts, while also achieving benefits for both ecosystems and human well-being through the adoption of inclusive governance approaches based on human rights, equity, transparency, and accountability. Addressing the triple planetary crisis of climate change, nature and biodiversity loss, and pollution undoubtedly requires interdisciplinary, cross-sectoral, collaborative approaches. Nowhere is this more apparent than at the intersection of conflict, climate, and the environment. Promoting peace at a global scale requires us to bridge silos across sectors and areas of expertise. Now more than ever, we need to bring together the security, policy, humanitarian, development, military, conservation, business, tech, and other communities to craft sustainable solutions for nature, people, and planet. I look forward to hearing some of these innovative solutions from our panel to follow. Thank you very much for your attention.